Welcome to another edition of the Best Business Minds, where we interview business leaders and academics who write thought-provoking books. I'm Marc Kramer, serial entrepreneur who consults with family businesses and entrepreneurs. And currently, I'm teaching entrepreneurship at Vinh University in Hanoi, Vietnam. Today's guest is Loretta Napoleoni, author of the book Technocapitalism, the rise of the new robber barons and the fight for the common good. Loretta, welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you, and I really enjoyed your book. And actually, I guess with what's going on now in the world, it's a very timely book. So before we jump into your book, if you don't mind, please give us your professional background about how you got to where you're at right now.
Okay, so I am an economist, and I worked for banks and stockbrokers in finance. Then at a certain point, I moved into financing of terrorism. And I was, for many years, for like 25 years, this was my expertise, funding of armed organization, money laundering, and, the bad guys, basically. Uh, and I wrote, I don't even know how many books, maybe I wrote 20, 21 books, and they're all translated in 20 or 23 languages, depending on the success of the book. And I'm Italian, but I live in London and the US.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. I really enjoyed this book, and probably I should maybe look at some of your other books and have you come back again sometime. So tell us why you wrote this book.
Well, to be honest, I wrote this book because I wanted to understand what was happening. It was very much a personal journey. I started it before, actually, I started right before the COVID lockdown. So, to a certain extent, technology made it possible for me to write a book because, I couldn't move, I couldn't go anywhere interviewing people. But thanks to technology, I was able to reach everybody. So it's quite nice from this point of view. And the message of the book is very much related to that, to the fact that technology is it's a product of humanity. It is to a certain extent our baby, and it could help us very much to improve our living standard, the way we actually interact with each other, but also it could save the planet. However, this is not happening, and technology is turning into a rogue force sometimes because it's controlled by a very small group of individuals who understand it. Who actually block to a certain extent also the knowledge of technology to the masses. But above all, these individuals are not using technology and technological innovation for the common good. This is why the subtitle of the book is The Robber Barons, because they remind very much of the robber barons, but they use it for their own personal wealth. And that is the crunch of the problem. So the book tries to explain how we got there, and also tries to teach people what we can do in order to change this situation.
I found it's very timely right now, especially what's going on in the world. And so many of these technology robber barons, unlike the robber barons in the past who at least gave back their wealth into society, many of them are not, with the exception of Bill Gates, reinvesting back into the world and making positive changes. I mean, if you look at Elon Musk, he doesn't believe in charity at all. Of course, Steve Jobs didn't. Now his wife is giving away a good chunk of his fortune to that. So it's very unfortunate that they are so self-absorbed that even though they are creating jobs, which is great, but they're not really putting back the money in a meaningful way. In chapter 1, you talk about cyberpunks. the cyberpunks movement emerged with a fierce commitment to privacy and freedom, but also exhibited a fragmented ideological landscape. How did this diversity both empower and limit the collective impact on modern cryptography and online privacy? And you should explain what defines a CryptoPunk.
So basically,
Or
the book,
cypherpunk, I meant cypherpunk.
yes. So the book starts in the 1980s. So, the genesis basically of the technological revolution that we have lived through in the last 30 to 40 years. So the cyberpunks are very important because this was a group of mathematicians, people that worked in Silicon Valley at the very, very beginning, and they were extremely concerned about the possibility that the state could control the individual and so spy on the individual through the net. So this is the beginning, really, of the web, the beginning of the revolution of the internet. So that was their concern. So they wanted to give the possibility to people to express themselves inside the web freely without anybody checking what they were saying with each other. So they were great believers in the democratization of the internet, so the digital democracy that the internet was going to bring about, so the great equalizer. Okay, so they decided to prevent this kind of intervention by the state, inventing a cryptographic system through which people could interact with each other on the net, and they did it. Now, this went against, of course, the U.S. government vision of the internet, because the U.S. government wanted to control what was happening. But in the end, they managed. They made it public, and today still people use it. Now, of course, they also did not envisage the birth of the dark net. They never thought about the dark side of an instrument like that. Anyway, the real limitation of this individual was financial. So although they invented a cryptographic system through which you could talk with each other without anybody knowing what you were saying, you couldn't exchange goods without using the channels which are controlled by the state, because of course the state has monopoly of money, right? The monetary monopoly. So the other had to use a credit card, or you had to use a bank transfer. So that was the real problem, and this problem was not solved until 2008, when the Bitcoin was introduced. So Satoshi Nakamoto, we don't know who he is or who they are, because it's unknown entity, appeared in the email of the cyberpunk without, so clearly he hacked it, he got in and produced this this document, which is called the white paper, where he explained exactly how the Bitcoin worked. And then, the rest is history, basically. So with the Bitcoin, the e-commerce really took off because you could exchange whatever you want without any control. But the reason why the book starts with this story is to show that the fear of the very early programmers and mathematicians that worked at the construction of the internet did not come from the private sector. It came from the state. While in reality, when you read the book, you realize that there's been a privatization of technological innovation right from the beginning. And at the end of the day, today is the state who is meant to protect us from the exploitation that is taking place through technological innovation. So we are today basically data. So we are at the same time, the data, but we're also the consumer of this data. We're nothing else. I mean, so we're being dehumanized by, the whole system.
So, given that cypherpunks' distrust of state power and central authorities, do you believe that their vision of technological empowerment for individuals still remains feasible in today's highly surveilled and commercialized digital environments?
Yeah, I do. I do. I think the internet. I mean, we're talking about technological innovation, which is vast. So if we focus, they were only focused on the internet. But the internet is a great communicator. The internet has the potential really to liberate a lot of people from the slavery of ignorance, for example, can connect individuals. Now, look at us, we're now talking to each other. I mean, this is highly, highly positive because, there's a possibility of exchanges, views, and idea. The real issue is the common good. So, I mean, who should control this system? I mean, who should have the keys to improve it. And this is a question I think at this point the state, the nation state, should address because it is a common good. You cannot live without this kind of connection. If you want to live in a so-called, developed world, if you do not have this kind of connection, you lag behind. So it could become not sharing it, not giving it to everybody, a discriminatory element. Which is absolutely not what the original idea of the internet was. So I do agree that their vision is still very, very valid, but um, somebody has to implement this vision, which can only be the state.
So the design of the Bitcoin solved the critical problem of digital money creation without double spending. By the way, I still don't understand the value of cryptocurrency. What do you see as the most revolutionary technical feature of Bitcoin that states and financial institutions find most challenging to confront? And shockingly, there are over 22,000 cryptocurrencies and over 2.1 million that have been actually created.
All right, so I would distinguish between, cryptocurrency in general and Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is the first cryptocurrency, and it is, the only one that is structured in a way that really mirrors the the way the monetary system has been structured from, the beginning of the history of humanity. So you have a product which is scarce, which is limited, and there's a Bitcoin, of course. The difference between the Bitcoin and the fiat money is the fact that the Bitcoin is not controlled by a central bank. The Bitcoin is scarce with a set limitation, so it will never suffer from inflation. Now, of course, we don't know what's going to happen to 2140 when the software will stop producing Bitcoin and will have reached the 21 million. But for the time being, we do have faith. Now, faith is the base of money because fiat money is based on faith. You have faith that the Federal Reserve will honor the $1. And by the way, if you look at the dollar a dollar banknote, it says, "In God we trust," meaning, it is an act of faith. So the use of the Bitcoin is exactly that, is the fact that it maintains its value. It's a store of value. It's a bit like gold. Many people use it as a liquid gold. And this is proven by the fact that since the beginning, the Bitcoin has risen from value, zero, basically, to, $110,000. So Anyway, it's in the book. There are two chapters that actually describe exactly how the Bitcoin works. The best feature, and again, Bitcoin, no cryptocurrency, the best feature is the blockchain. Because you see, once you have a blockchain which is unchangeable, unaltered, and is set in stone. I mean, I think I use in the book the example of the milestones that the Roman used to put when they were building the streets of the empire, that the milestone was set, and you couldn't move it. So the blockchain has the potential to restructure completely in a much more agile way. The public administration, also, the data related to each of us. I think I have the example of the medical information. So people could, keep all their medical information on a blockchain and open it only when they need it. So nobody could actually tamper with it. I mean, so I think that's the most innovative part of the Bitcoin, the one that can be transferred from the monetary arena, because I mean the Bitcoin is born, as I said before, to bypass the difficulties of using only state-controlled channels for payments for e-commerce, so they can be exported to other aspects of the everyday life.
Bitcoin's environmental criticism often focuses on proof of work's energy consumption. But how does carbon footprint compare to a traditional system like gold mining and conventional banking?
Well, I mean, there are some arguments in favor of the Bitcoin about how much CO2 is actually produced in traditional banking. Massive, absolutely massive in comparison to the Bitcoin. Now, the Bitcoin does require high energy consumption because the formula. So basically, the system works in this way that the software produces a formula that needs to be solved in order to release the block of the bitcoins. This formula has become extremely complex, so you need highly powerful computers in order to solve the formula. On top of that, of course, every time this formula is solved, then you need proof of work. So you need the entire community of people who have downloaded the software to agree that that formula has been solved properly. So that's huge, absolutely huge consumption. But Bitcoin's farms are not in the center of Manhattan, where the energy consumption cost is very, very high. So they're put in certain places where energy cost is very low, but also where there is a sort of surplus of energy that can be easily used. So they tap into this kind of energy. So at the end of the day, if you do compare at global level how energy the traditional banking consume and how Bitcoin consumes, actually, Bitcoin is more green than the banking. But again, you see the approach to Bitcoin has been naturally negative right from the beginning, because initially it was used in the dark net, and also is a threat to the monetary power of the state. If you have an alternative currency that can be used anywhere in the world, you are, chipping at the monetary power of the state. And this is something that you can't do.
Yeah, I don't see China and Russia and others going for this at all for the long term. It takes away their control. NFTs, national fungible tokens, revolutionize digital property ownership by providing certificates on blockchain, yet they have mostly benefited a tech-savvy elite. What social and economic effects do you anticipate as NFTs potentially expand beyond art into a broader commercial and social realms? And do you see that happening?
Yes, I think this is very possible, and there was an attempt before the big crash. I mean, NFT have crashed at the end of COVID during the crypto winter. Um, it is a shame, I think, that the application of the NFT has been. It's been related only to certain kind of industries which are not, the everyday, the industry where, the everyday individual, operates. But the digital art, I find that the digital art actually, it is art. So a digital artist was unable to claim the ownership of his own art because digital art is easily copied. You can't prove what is the real and what is not the real. Now with the NFT, we have given the digital artists a new dimension, which is a dimension of reality. So I think this is quite positive. But in the sport industry also, the NFT is used in the fandom. Again, we're talking about not vital industry, but it is a way that connects the sportsman to his fans in a very direct way. I don't think that at the moment NFT is going to be as popular as it was initially. I'm thinking that the investment that is shown into the Bitcoin and some of the cryptos is confirms the fact that the crypto and the blockchain are the sector that are particularly of particular interest to people and to application in different industries, not the FT at the moment. But in the long run, why not?
So you do see it has great potential. I thought it might be like a fad.
No, I don't think so. I think the digitalization of life is an unstoppable phenomenon. We may disagree with that. We may, think, what's the point of digital art? What's the point of having a digital screen on your sitting room with digital art instead of having been somebody that can afford it instead of having a real painting by a real artist. I mean, those digital artists are artists, and art is important. Art is a manifestation of life. I mean, it's a manifestation of what is happening in life. So if we look at Goya and what Goya, put on the canvas was, a reflection of what was happening in Spain when Goya was alive. And today we do understand better those period of history because of those artists. I think that the story of Bibo, the 64 million first digital NFT of the 5,000 days, it is a document of history. And in 50 years, 100 years, people will look at that image and say, oh, look what was happening in those 5,000 days, the transition, the big jump of the digitalization of life.
The metaverse and NFTs offer personalized, escapist digital worlds. Do you see the movement as a threat to social cohesion, or do you believe there is potential for NFTs and virtual spaces to build a more democratic community-based models, which is what the intention was, right?
Yes, no, I do agree with that. I mean, the intention was, again, so we said at the beginning of this conversation, the digitalization of life was considered to be the instrument through which people would be liberated, and and the great equalizer of society. No, I don't think the metaverse is at all that. I don't see the potentials. I mean, I don't see the positive potential for humanity in the metaverse. I see the metaverse as a sort of distraction, as a sort of relaxation. I mean, it's like saying, cinema. Of course, cinema has been fundamental. It's a cultural expression. But the metaverse, I think the metaverse is not that. It's very much an escapist dimension. It's people that do not want to live in reality. And anyway, we saw that the success of First Life. I mean, First Life came out. I think came out 21 years ago. And initially it was very, very successful with, the avatar. And then it never really took off. I'm not sure that this new metaverse, the one that, Meta is, Zuckerberg is promoting primarily, is going to have such a big success. I mean, at the end of the day, I think human beings need to connect, and they need to connect um, not only virtually, but also, face to face and physically. If we bypass this, if we bypass the actual meeting and the physical interaction, I think we become something else. So we're not human anymore. And the metaverse is attempting to do that because, of course, it's done for for business to make money. So the more you use it, the better it is. And that is the problem.
Financial engineering produce complex products like MBS and CDOs, and that spread risk, but ultimately failed in 2008. What lessons can we learn from the crisis about the systemic dangers of unchecked financial innovation, which like CDOs, there was nothing even backing those things. I mean, they're like emperor's new clothes.
Yeah, I mean, okay, so all of that, the derivatives, basically, they're not related to technological innovation. I mean, these are products um, of financial engineering, which is something different. How did it happen? Well, it happened because of the deregulation, basically. I mean, we had during the Clinton administration, well, we had the progressive deregulation of the financial system in the United States. United States being the most important, financial center in the world. From there, it spread all over the world. I think, ironically, the industry that was less involved in the crash of 2008 was actually, the technological industry because of the dot-com crisis, which took place at the end of the 90s. So they had been hit heavily by that crisis, and therefore, they were still recovering from that time. The interesting thing about the 2008 crisis is what's happened to the money that were produced to bail out banks and financial institutions. So if you remember, that the crisis was created by the subprime mortgages, and then it spread, of course, to all the so-called derivatives. But it was still all based upon the debt, because the debt is the engine of monetary growth, right? I mean, why do we print money? We print money because we need the money to pay the debt. That's been like this since the end of the gold exchange standard in 1971. So the Federal Reserve decided that in order to prevent another crisis like 1929, the best way was to print money, so massive amount of money, trillions and trillions, and funnel this money through the banking and financial system in order to prevent bank failures. So, you have a huge debt. You get the money from the state. The state, lends you the money, right? And then with this money, you cover the hole, and then you have to find a way, to pay back. Now, what happened was that all this money, went through the system, the financial system, and the financial system start looking. So banks didn't fail, financial institution didn't fail. So they start looking at an alternative way to make, big money from, the mortgages, the subprime mortgages. And here it was, Silicon Valley was right there. Technological innovation was taking place. It was really at the early stage. I mean, if you think about, that the Apple became Apple from 2000 to 2010. The iPhone was produced in 2007. And I know it's impossible for us to think that we operated without the iPhone until 2007, but this is it, right? So 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 the timing was perfect, and this money arrived and gave the possibility to the companies that were there already. So we're talking about, five companies basically. So we're talking about Microsoft, we're talking about Facebook, we're talking about Amazon. I mean, of course, we're talking about Tesla. So all of these companies were ready, to take the money and do the big jump and become, really global, leaders in the technological industry. And it was a great move by by Wall Street, because the money that they invested came back with massive profits. If you look at the stock exchange, after 2008, the Standard and Poor was kept afloat and start rising because of five companies. Today, seven, the Magnificent Seven. So this money came back, the financial system could pay back the state, and then they started doing exactly the same thing. Because today, do not think that we're not in exactly the same situation. I mean, the amount of money that the financial system has generated in lending is a multiplier of what they really have in their funds. So something like the subprime crisis could happen again. Credit cards, for example, could be one of those. So it's just a matter of time until the same thing happens, because the deregulation has not been reversed. But in the meantime, we have, an industry, which is a high-tech industry, which benefited greatly and became, richer than the financial industry.
Do you think there should be more regulation? I mean,
Yeah.
we have, go ahead.
Yes, there should be more regulation. I don't think there should be absolutely more regulation. There should be a control on, the amount of debt that can be generated. But then again, we go back to what I was saying before. I mean, monetary growth is due to debt. If you do not increase the debt, you do not have monetary growth. Nothing, there's nothing behind the US dollar apart from the debt. And that's true for the euros, and it's true for the yen, it's true for any of the other currencies. So the monetary problem needs to be resolved. How money creation is going to be structured in order to prevent this systemic crisis that keep happening after a certain number of years. Bitcoin is an alternative, because Bitcoin, at least as we are today, is limited to 21 million. So Bitcoin actually creates money by, appreciating, by becoming more valuable. But um, this is a major issue. This is a huge, huge issue, which we haven't addressed for over a century, because the collapse of the gold standard, it happened in the late 19th centuries. So, we're carrying on the same problem. We had World War One, we had World War Two, we had the big 1929 crash. It's all related to money creation.
Do you have the same concern that some Americans have with the amount of debt the U.S. is carrying, and now with $2 trillion more dollars, and I think the total debt is 37 trillion. Does that is that something that we should be concerned about?
Yes, I mean, I am concerned about that, but not for the reason that most people are concerned. You see, I mean, if you are a state and you do a monetary sovereignty, so you issue your money, right? You can never go bankrupt because, I mean, you issue your own money. So you can keep printing. Yes, you can face inflation. Absolutely, yes. But you're not going bankrupt. The problem is not that. The problem is all of this money, all of this debt is guaranteed by the state, but is accumulated through a financial system which is lending money to various sectors and industry. Look at the subprime. So, the banks lend money to people that could not afford those houses. And those people could not afford to pay back the debt. But the money came from the state. So the debt was the debt of the financial system. So I am concerned about that. I'm not concerned about the US debt. So if you look at the US debt, yes, it's absolutely huge. But how do you reduce it? You reduce it by a discipline, a new way of running the finances of the state and the finances of the financial system, because the two things go together.
Modern monetary theory challenges conventional about state budgets by arguing that sovereign currency issuers cannot run out of money, as you've been just talking about. How does the MMT reshape our understanding of taxation and public spending in today's monetary system? Is that something to worry about?
Well, I didn't know very much about the modern monetary theory because I mean it's extremely controversial. But I did study it when I was writing the book because I really wanted to understand. I mean, Stephanie Kelton, she's a professor I think she's a professor at Philadelphia University, actually, if I'm not mistaken. But she was called in to advise Congress, actually not Congress, sorry, the Senate, about monetary issues. And she wrote a book, The Debt Trap, which is very much, sort of, the Bible of the MMT theory. I think, the concept of taxation of the MMT theory is very, very true, meaning, you know, uh, it's not the people that owns the money, is the state who owns the money, because the state prints the money. So before I get my salary, the state has to print the money. It's exactly the opposite of what Mrs. Thatcher said. Mrs. Thatcher said the state has no money, right? It's you who have the money, so I have to tax you so you can give me the money that I need. Well, those money have been printed before. And because, the printing of money is linked to nothing but the debt, then, why do we need to pay taxes? And the answer is we do pay taxes because by paying taxes, you maintain the monetary sovereignty, because you can't pay taxes in Bitcoin. You can't pay taxes if you live in the US in euros. You have to pay taxes in US dollars. That means that you have to earn in US dollars. So that means that the only money in circulation within the United States is the US dollar, right? Now, US dollar is not the best example because, the dollar is still the reserve currency of the world. So, you do have dollars in circulation in other countries, and, especially in countries that are under particular stress, failed states, any war zone. I mean, the US dollar is the currency that is accepted. But let's say euros, or let's say yen, or let's say pound sterling. Yeah. You can't go around the world and use those currencies, but inside the borders of the United Kingdom, you can only use pounds. So this is why we actually pay taxes. That's what the MMT theory says. Now, it's a big threat, again, to the monopoly of money of the state. And together with the Bitcoins, you can see how we are really questioning the foundation of the international monetary system, not the organization, but the system.
After the 2008 financial crisis, technology companies grew massively with venture capital and government incentives overtaking finance. How has the rebalancing changed power relations between tech, finance, labor, and the state?
Well, I mean, tech finance is still today. I mean, look at the stock exchange. I mean, everybody, any individual, any 401k has in a portfolio a large percentage of the tech industry. Still, the number one industry, still the one that keeps things going. I don't think there is going to be any change in the near future about that. I mean, tech finance is the number one sector, and it will continue to be so. This is why I am concerned about the power that the technological sector is accumulating. I mean, look what's happened with the inauguration of Donald Trump. I mean, there were five of the top seven tech titans in the first row. So that is the real concern. I think it's how this power can be so, because I mean it's huge. I mean we never had anything like that in the history of humanity. Because here we're talking global, okay? So the robber barons, yes, the robber barons were very, very powerful, very, very rich. But in comparison, they were powers in comparison to these guys. Here we're talking about people that they are worth more than the GDP of nations.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you know the concept. I think it's difficult for us to understand the implication of something like that. So the the entry of this individual into politics is something that I think it was inevitable, because when you get to that kind of level, of course you want to be also a maker and shaker at political level and social level. Now that is dangerous, very dangerous.
So the tariffs. Um, some days the news reports sound like the tariffs made a lot of sense and it's a good idea for the United States, and won't it will affect the world negatively, but not in a significant way. And then other days you read that it's bad all around, and bad for Americans because they're showing that Americans are going to end up paying about $2,200 more, especially middle and lower class. That's a huge amount of money for folks. What's your take on the tariffs? Is this a smart move on Trump's part? What's the implications for everybody else, and how will this affect the U.S. long term, especially our relations with partners?
Well, I think it's early day to say how all of this is going to be shaped. Now, the system of tariffs is extremely complex, and it varies from countries to countries. But let's say, for example, the situation in Europe, what's happening with Europe. The Europeans agreed to a 15% tariff with a serious condition, among which investment, huge investment in the US, and also purchase of large amount of weapons from the US, the weapons that they need, to remilitarize, Europe. So this was extremely controversial in the last few days. Okay, so how did the system work before? Okay, the system before worked like that. The US products, they were subject to a VAT tax at entry. Now, the VAT tax is a value-added tax that is levied on every single product in Europe, and that varies, but is between 18 and 22%. On top of that, US products, depending on which product, were subject to an additional import duty. Okay, and this import duty varies. So, for example, import duties on agricultural products is extremely high, it's between 30 and 40%, because the Europeans do not want to import agricultural product from the US, because there is a GMO and there is different kind of ways of producing agricultural products. So at the end of the day, these were not per se tariffs imposed by the Europeans, but they acted as such. Well, of course, the same products sent to the US was not subject to the same levies. Let's call them levies. Okay. So, how do you think the Europeans will now deal with that? Well, I mean, the Europeans could do what, General Motors did, because, General Motors was hit by the tariffs that were levied on spare parts and different materials, and they decided to absorb the tariff. So the price of the finished product in the US has not changed. It's the profits that the company is making has shrunk. Okay, now, you need to be able to afford this kind of shrinkage because I mean, if you do not have profits, you will have problems. You go bust eventually. The Europeans can do the same thing. So this is the issue that is discussed at the moment in Europe, is the fact, how are we going to offset that tariff that has been imposed, right? And the way to offset it, of course, is to lower the tax, lower the VAT, for example. I mean, it has to be reciprocal, right? Because I mean, the real goal will be 0-0, right? Or 10-10, as they did with the UK. But what I'm saying is there are certain situations like US and European trade where it's not true that before the tariffs introduced by Trump, there was no tariff. The Europeans were levying import duties, which the Americans didn't.
The gig economy, exemplified by Uber, and challenges labor protections under the guise of technological innovation. What ethical and social consequences arise from the rise of gig work in the new techno-capitalist era?
All right, so this is a very important point because you see, I mean, the technological revolution is very much like the industrial revolution. It has changed completely the world, and it has created a new life, which is the virtual life. So there are many points in common with the Industrial Revolution. Now, the Industrial Revolution was um, technologically driven. It produced massive exploitation of labor, but it also produced the trade unions, the consciousness of, as Marx wrote, the consciousness of the workers. So at the end of the day, if you look at capitalism, the model which emerged from the Industrial Revolution, capitalism is based upon an equation that says capital plus labor equals production. So that is capitalism. So you have two elements which are equally important, and without one and the other, you won't be able to produce the production, right? So here, everything changes because there's a new element introduced, which is the machine, the technological innovation. So while the spinning jenny of the Industrial Revolution needed to be operated by an individual, here you do have machines that don't need to be operated by anybody. So the equation of capitalism is changing dramatically. So we do have the labor element becoming less and less and less important, and potentially could become obsolete. Now, that the ethical consequences are massive, because you are making our work irrelevant, obsolete, and this is why with artificial intelligence, the OpenAI, Sam Altman, has been one of the biggest advocates of universal income, because how did they manage to make it accepted by people that artificial intelligence is going to take over what we're doing, by saying that the machines will work and will take the benefits of this work, because the machine doesn't need a salary, right? It doesn't have a life, so we can play golf and enjoy ourselves instead of going to work. But working is fundamental for the individual, because without productive work, the individual has no meaning. I mean, we are here, we have reached here because, we did struggle and we did work, from the beginning until now. So the ethical consequences, I mean, you could think that potentially we could generate in a dystopian society like the Matrix. I
Right.
mean, this, yeah.
That's not going to happen. A question from the audience. Any observed changes or improvements since the book was actually published?
No, unfortunately not. No, I mean we saw the wedding of Jeff Bezos in Venice, which was unbelievable. No, on the contrary, I think well, we saw also Musk working for a short time with Trump. No, I think that there is no improvement. I think having done this a book tour in many countries, I can tell you that there is a massive concern from the people. But at the same time, people don't know how to take control of the situation.
Here's a question I've always wanted to know the answer to. You call carbon credits a license to pollute, and I agree with that because they often pay for preventative measures rather than real carbon removal. What reforms or alternative approaches could make carbon finance genuinely effective in tackling climate change?
Well, I think, carbon capture is a completely different thing. That is something that we have, various technology that can be applied. So you want to produce a certain amount of CO2. Yes, you can, providing that you capture this CO2 and you turn it into something else. But that is a technology that is very costly in comparison to, the carbon credits.
So, final question that I'd like you to answer for us is, we just talked about AI, and the question I get all the time when I speak around Asia is, what's going to happen to my kids? Like, what should they major in? How is this going to impact our future and our kids' future? I think now the rock stars are people who are plumbers, electricians, handymen, people that do something with their hands as opposed to necessarily doing something with their brains. Where's this all going to end up? Because they're
Yeah, I think
predicting
it's,
20%
it's
unemployment in a few
yeah.
years in the
Well,
US.
Well, I think, what I think, for example, I think that hairdressing is probably one of the best professions because nobody wants, especially women, nobody wants a machine to cut, the hair or shave it.
Right.
This is but yeah, it's the revenge of the so-called, I wouldn't even say blue collar because, blue collar, immediately you think about the assembly line, but, the the revenge of the old jobs like a carpenter. I guess yes, you could have a machine building a bookshelf, but possibly the machine would not deal with all your changing of mind. So being a builder also could be again hairdresser. The nails. Oh my gosh, all these, beauticians that do nails. I don't think I would like to have my nails done by a machine. So it's yeah, but for sure, lawyers, forget writers, journalists. My profession, what I've done all my life, most likely is going to be, performed by a series of robots in the next 50 years.
No question about it. I mean, we're already seeing it now. McKinsey and Bain and Company are letting go lots of people because their clients are telling them, we don't need an army of people out of college to go and do the research when we can do it quickly using any of the AI products that are out there. And
Yeah.
it's a scary thought. And when parents are saying, I wanted my kid to major in business analytics, which was a hot major, or computer programming. And now all those things are done by AI. What's the options for us? I'm even running a hackathon here for 700 freshmen in December for them to figure out what jobs can be created with AI, not reduced. So it's going to be something that we're going to need to answer. And maybe the government has to limit what AI can be allowed to do until we figure the answer. So there isn't mass chaos.
Well, I think it's going to be possible to do that, to limit AI, because I mean, I think what the development is going to be that there will be many AIs. So all these different individuals that are immensely rich and control technology will produce their own AI, which they'll tell us whatever they want us to know. I mean, this is super dangerous because you may actually rewrite history, change culture, and turn people into something different. Yes, I agree with you. AI should be limited. At the moment, there is a sort of control, at least ChatGPT. But then, we have DeepSeek, which is, super popular also, uses a much smaller pool of information, but, it's reasoning. So, how are you going to prevent again, you need global governance, right?
Yeah,
How are you going
there's
to,
got to be some guardrails on
yeah.
there,
Well,
because
yeah,
we can't have
absolutely.
this.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I mean, if we don't do it now, within the next generation, so the kids that are in elementary school today will not know how to write, will not know how to do research. Everything will be done by AI, and by the time they will be in their 30s, they'll be ignorant about everything. We lose, you see, we lose our culture.
No problem. No question. This is the one technology in my lifetime that I actually feel is a detriment to
Yes.
society, even though I use it all the time for putting plans together and research and everything. Lorraine, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today. I really enjoyed your book. It was very thought-provoking, and I think we had great conversation today, and it was very
Yes.
enlightening. So thanks for taking the time to speak with us.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Have a good rest of your week and a good weekend. Take care.